Hello, YouTube. Despite skepticism and ideological hostility to mystical and religious beliefs, there was still a belief in psychics in the USSR. True, they were considered as a kind of natural scientific phenomenon. They were considered carriers of the hidden forces of humanity, which can become available to diligent researchers if they make the proper efforts for this. The peak of the fascination with the extrasensory perception in the Soviet Union occurred at the very end of the country's existence, but this obsession with everything extraordinary was preceded by another noticeable surge that occurred in the late 1960s. For example, in the 1968 documentary 7 Steps Over the Horizon, it was released on the screens of the country. It was shot at the Kiev Nauch Film TV film company by the director Felix Sobolev and was entirely focused on individuals who possessed, what you can call entirely supernatural psychic abilities. It was a big sensation for its time. Soviet citizens were shown a driver, for example, who skillfully and with icy calm drove his vehicle blindfolded. Also, it depicted acts of telekinesis and telepathy, people with phenomenal abilities, as well as hypnotic sessions. In the mid-1960s, Felix Sobolev significantly changed the perception of popular science cinema. His films, The Language of Animals, Do Animals Think?, 7 Steps Beyond the Horizon, became an audience sensation in the Soviet Union, gathered full halls in cinemas. One of Sobolev's creative discoveries is the film Experiment, or Experiment in the Frame. The director made the viewer witness a scientific experiment conducted by scientists. This is how the extreme film Me and Others was made for its time, which is about conformal behavior and the phenomenon of group pressure. In particular, the film 7 Steps Beyond the Horizon showed the achievements of the famous Soviet hypnotist, psychotherapist Vladimir Leonidovich Raikov. He claimed that hypnotic influence could awaken hidden creative talents in the subject. It should be noted that a number of techniques from among those demonstrated were subsequently exposed by active skeptics, of course, to be unreal, so to say. And however, skeptics are skeptics. There were very talented people in that film. For example, chess grandmaster Tal, who could actually conduct simultaneous chess sessions with 10 opponents. Today, to some, the film is currently seen as a rather contradictory and not the most reliable source of information. And some journalists try to claim that experiments were conducted with numerous violations of the principles of science. But Vladimir Leonidovich Raikov, who passed away in 2007, was a man of numerous talents. He was a professional psychotherapist. He was fond of poetry and fine arts. He wrote works on philosophy and lectured at leading medical universities in the USSR. In addition to scientific work, he had written on philosophy. He, like I said, was engaged in fine arts and started in films. He was the founder of the development of creative abilities in hypnosis. He introduced new theoretical concepts of understanding hypnosis and practical possibilities of its application. He believed that hypnosis is one of the forms of unconscious experience of creativity. He discovered, isolated from the holistic procedure of hypnotherapy, and carefully theoretically developed and practically tested a method for the prevention and treatment of somatic diseases, indicating the enormous biological resources of the body. He also developed a special method of self-suggestion for mobilizing the psyche, which a person can use for his self-development, creative mobilization, and treatment. He was a member of the American Association of Therapeutic and Experimental Hypnosis and a professor of the University of New Medicine in Milan, Italy. He's one of the few Russian scientists who has been invited to the World and European Congresses on Hypnosis, and he has been published several times in the International Journal of Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis, as well as the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis and the Japanese Journal of Clinical Hypnosis. He had a doctorate degree. However, the main achievement of his life is considered to be the concept of the so-called creative hypnosis. He believed that a master of hypnotic influence could subconsciously reach out to a person and release those of his or her unique abilities that are locked under the yoke of public opinion or negative personal attitudes. In his sessions, he introduced patients into a somnambulistic state and instilled in them the confidence that, in fact, they were recognized world geniuses in a particular field of art. For example, he could convince a hypnotized person that he was, in fact, none other than the artist Rembrandt. Next, the patient, convinced by the hypnotist of his exceptional genius, picked up a brush and turned the canvas into a work of art. Alternately, the doctor could convince the subject that he was a great musician, and the patient, even being a person far from music, gave birth to masterpieces. Further, according to the scientists, the patient got rid of the hypnotic effect and could not remember their actions during those hours while they associated themselves with outstanding people in the field of art. But some residual phenomena persisted for a long time. They became more receptive, creative, and open. Of course, this technique was not suitable for all participants of the sessions. First of all, the subjects must have a certain level of cultural development. It is difficult to behave like Salvador Dali without knowing who this Salvador Dali is. In addition, these people should fall into the category of hypnotic, that is, be susceptible to hypnotic influence. It is known that not every person is available for this type of mental influence. So what do representatives of the modern scientific community think not only about Raikov's activities, but also about hypnotic effects in general? In fact, there is no consensus on this topic. A number of researchers perceive hypnosis as a special scientific phenomenon, a kind of altered state of consciousness in which a person falls under the influence of a specialist. However, there is also the opinion of skeptics, according to which hypnosis is not a special physiological state, but the result of behavior of people with a high degree of suggestibility. The most famous adept of this point of view is the American scientist Nicholas Spanos. He believes that hypnosis could only work if the subject himself wanted, even if on an unconscious level, for the experience to be successful. Now, I want to tell you about the impressions of Russian Professor Kozlov, a psychologist. During his days as a university student, he was very interested in hypnosis. He was about 20 years old at the time. He took his sister with him and went to Raikov to participate in his experiments and become talented. The reality turned out to be more complicated. Raikov did not work with everyone. Raikov chose only hypnotic ones. It was like this. About 40 people came. They were lined up. A man came out in front of them. It turned out that it was Raikov and shouted at them, "Sleep." Well, the Kozlov shouted but did not make an impression. Well, the impression was not made on the Kozlov. Raikov continued to suggest, "You have grapes in your hands. Eat the grapes." Kozlov continued to stand in complete perplexity. What? Where are the grapes? He doesn't see any grapes. But suddenly Kozlov noticed that several people next to him were grumbling. They were standing, staggering, and really seemed to be eating something. It was these people that Vladimir Leonidovich Raikov kept for himself and told everyone else, "You are dismissed." Well, Kozlov did not get to see Raikov, but among the 7 people that he kept for himself, meaning Raikov, was his sister. And from her, Kozlov learned the details about what was happening in the Raikov's experiments. When you believe in yourself, your eyes shine. It turns out that hypnosis can do miracles, but only within the framework of common sense. The possibilities of a person under hypnosis have their limitations, and if a person does not know how to play chess at all, he will not be able to play chess in the state of hypnosis. If a person does not have specific knowledge, there will not appear that knowledge under hypnosis. However, if a person knows at least the rules of the game, knows the pawn, knight, and rook move, then against the background of basic knowledge, he begins to think quickly and freely on the chessboard, begins to play chess at the level, at least of the first junior level. And this is already a very serious level. In an ordinary life, it means several years of dedicated work. The same applies to playing the piano. If a person under hypnosis will not play Tchaikovsky's first concerto, if he has never heard it, but the great art of improvisation opens up before him. So, if asked, can you play the piano? I don't know, I haven't tried it. Suddenly it turns out to be a reality. That is, a person under hypnosis sits down at the piano, puts his hands on the keyboard row, begins to select sounds, and gradually begins to play. He has musical improvisation. He feels the instrument. He starts playing. When Kozlov realized the possibilities offered by self-hypnosis, he realized that he also wanted to believe in himself, develop his abilities, write books freely, and draw paintings. Yes, Raikov did not hire him. Kozlov was not hypnotic enough, but he managed to arrange with his assistants, Raikov's, who needed someone to train immersion in hypnosis. And she studied with Kozlov for the entire year. And even if she didn't achieve her result, he did. Kozlov learned the ability to relax. He learned how to give himself competent autosuggestion. In fact, he mastered self-hypnosis. After that, Kozlov painted the walls of the kitchen at home with the magnificent paintings. He invented them himself. He painted them himself, although Kozlov had not previously had such talents, basically, whatsoever in that field. Even before that, he lived with the feeling that he could do a lot, but after Kozlov mastered auto-training, in fact, self-hypnosis, his self-confidence increased even more and definitely strengthened. Here's another interesting episode I want to tell you. In the Ostankino concert studio, where the Russian Channel 1 information complex is now located, the management sometimes held meetings with interesting people. And so one day they invited Vladimir Raikov, the doctor who was seriously involved in hypnosis. The amazing experiments he conducted on stage caused mixed reactions and controversy in the audience. And suddenly their old friend, so to say, by the nickname of Cerberus, the policeman who worked at the entrance of the Ostankino building, appeared on the stage. "This is all a scam," he said authoritatively. "In our village, one person hypnotized like that, and then the cow disappeared." The audience started laughing, and for some reason, it made Raikov terribly angry. He approached Cerberus, did some manipulations, and the policeman began to sing. He crowed and barked. He made animal sounds, to put it short. He was placed between two chairs. He was leaning on the back of his head and heels, and two spectators sent at him. With a roar of laughter that there was an audience, it was incredible. About 10 minutes later, Cerberus was restored to his original condition, and he picked up his fallen documents and fled the scene in horror. No one else saw him in Ostankino after that. This was told by Lysenko and was recorded on TV in Moscow, prosaic program in the year 2011. That is what I wanted to let you know today. You can see my other videos about psi research and in ESP in the USSR and Russia. And I've done lectures on this too. I've written articles. You can see some of my presentations on television from years ago. Sometimes they play them. And I will continue to bring you such stories. Again, if you like my research, you can support me through the links you'll find in the description to this video. Please tell others about my work. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like my videos. Thank you.